The rooftop smelled of jasmine and candle wax, the kind of scent that makes you think everything in life is perfect, even if just for a moment. I stood there in my best suit, the one I'd pressed twice to make sure every crease was sharp, my heart thumping like it did 7 years ago when I first saw her walk down the aisle. Tonight was our anniversary, and I'd planned it all, rented the rooftop, hired a violinist, invited our closest friends. The table was set with her favorite lilies, and I'd written a toast, folded neatly in my pocket, ready to tell everyone how much she meant to me. I adjusted my tie, glancing at the city lights below, feeling like the luckiest man alive. The guests were chatting, their voices soft against the music, and I kept checking my watch. She was late, but that wasn't new. She always liked making an entrance. I smiled to myself, picturing her in that red dress she loved, the one that made her eyes glow. I didn't mind waiting. I never did. The elevator dinged, and my chest tightened with excitement. I turned, ready to see her, ready to pull her into my arms and start the night right. But when the doors slid open, my smile froze. There she was, sure, but not alone. Her arm was looped through a stranger's, a tall guy with slicked-back hair and a smirk that made my stomach twist. He wore a suit too, but it looked like it cost more than my car. The guests went quiet, the violinist faltering for a beat. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind racing to catch up. Who was this guy? Why was she holding on to him like that? I took a step forward, my mouth dry, but before I could say anything, she spoke. "Everyone," she said, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the murmurs. "I'd like you to meet Damien, the real man in my life. Not a kid like you." Her eyes locked on mine, cold and steady, like she'd been practicing this moment. The words hit me like a punch, knocking the air out of my lungs. A kid? Me? I'd spent 7 years building a life for us, working late nights, saving every penny, planning nights like this just to see her smile. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, others staring at me like I was a stranger at my own party. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. My hand went to my pocket, brushing against the toast I'd written, the one I'd spent hours perfecting. She stepped forward, Damien still at her side, his smirk growing wider. She pulled an envelope from her purse and held it out to me, her nails catching the candlelight. "Take it," she said, her tone flat, like she was talking to a waiter. I reached for it, my fingers numb, and tore it open. Divorce papers. My eyes scanned the pages, the legal jargon blurring together, but one phrase stood out: immediate eviction. The house, our house, wasn't mine anymore. She'd done something, pulled some string I hadn't seen. "You have 30 minutes to leave," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Don't make a scene." A scene? I wasn't the one turning our anniversary into a public execution. I looked at her, searching for the woman I'd married, the one who'd laughed with me over late-night pizza, who'd cried in my arms when her mom got sick. But she wasn't there. Just this stranger, staring at me like I was nothing. The violinist stopped playing altogether, and the silence was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, friends we'd known for years, her coworkers, my old college buddy who'd flown in just for tonight. Nobody said a word. Not one of them stood up for me. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask why she'd do this now, here, in front of everyone. But my throat was tight, and my legs felt like they might give out. Damien leaned in, whispering something in her ear, and she laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that made my skin crawl. I clutched the envelope, the paper crumpling in my fist, and then I noticed something else in my pocket. Another envelope, one I'd almost forgotten about. Not hers. Mine. Something I'd prepared months ago, just in case. A backup plan I never thought I'd need. I looked at her one last time, hoping for a crack in her armor, a hint of regret. Nothing. Just that cold stare and Damien's arm around her waist. 30 minutes, she repeated, turning away like I was already gone. I didn't beg. I didn't shout. I just turned and walked toward the elevator, my shoes clicking on the polished floor. The guests parted for me, their whispers starting up again, but I didn't care. My mind was spinning, piecing things together, late nights she'd blamed on work, phone calls she'd taken in the other room, the way she'd stopped saying "I love you" months ago. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind? The elevator doors closed, shutting out the rooftop and the life I thought I had. I leaned against the wall, my breath shaky, the divorce papers still in my hand. But my other hand went to that second envelope, the one she didn't know about. I didn't open it, not yet. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside, and it was enough to keep me standing. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd broken me. But as the elevator descended, I felt something shift inside me, something hard and quiet and sure. This wasn't the end. Not even close. I stepped out into the night, the city air cool against my face, and started walking. 30 minutes to leave? Fine. I'd leave. But I wasn't running. I was regrouping. And when I came back, she'd see who the real kid was. The motel room smelled like stale coffee and bleach, the kind of place where dreams go to die quietly. I woke up on a lumpy mattress, the neon sign outside flickering through the thin curtains, casting jagged shadows across the ceiling. My suit from last night was crumpled on the floor, a reminder of the rooftop, the toast I never gave, and her voice calling me a kid in front of everyone. My chest ached, not from sadness but from the weight of it all. 7 years of my life, gone in one night. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, the divorce papers and eviction notice still on the nightstand where I'd left them. The clock read 7:14 a.m., and for a moment, I just stared at it, trying to figure out who I was now. Not a husband anymore. Not a homeowner. Just a guy in a cheap motel with nothing but a duffel bag and a second envelope I hadn't opened yet. I reached for my phone, half expecting a message, an apology, something to prove last night was a bad dream. Nothing. Just a dead screen and a reflection of my own tired face. A knock on the door snapped me out of it. I froze, my pulse picking up. Who even knew I was here? I hadn't told anyone, not my cousin, not my old college buddy who'd stood silent at the party. The knock came again, sharper this time, and I got up, moving quietly to the door. Through the peephole, I saw a guy in a stiff gray suit, holding a clipboard. Not a cop, but close enough to make my stomach twist. I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. "Marcus Reed?" he asked, his voice flat, like he'd said my name 100 times already. I nodded, and he slid a thin packet through the gap. "You've been served," he said, then turned and walked away, his shoes crunching on the gravel lot. I shut the door, my hands shaking as I tore open the packet. A temporary restraining order. She'd filed it, claiming I was a threat, unstable, a danger to her and her new life. There was more, a financial claim, saying I'd mismanaged our accounts, that she was entitled to everything. The house, the savings, even my car. It was all lies, every word, but the legal stamps and signatures made it real enough to hurt. I sank onto the bed, the papers slipping from my hands. This wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation. She wasn't just leaving me, she was trying to erase me, to make sure I had nothing left to stand on. I pictured her last night, arm in arm with that smug guy, her laugh cutting through the crowd. She thought she'd won, but she could rewrite our story and leave me as the loser. My fingers brushed against the second envelope in my jacket pocket, the one I'd carried out of the rooftop like a lifeline. I didn't open it. Not yet. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside, and it was more than just paper, it was proof I wasn't as helpless as she thought. I'd been careful, maybe too careful, over the years. Little things she never noticed, like the way I'd set up accounts she didn't know about, or the friend I'd kept in touch with who knew the law better than anyone. She thought she knew me, but she only saw what I let her see. I grabbed my phone, plugged it in, and waited for it to power up. The room was quiet except for the hum of the mini fridge, and my mind kept replaying last night, the way the guest looked away, the way her new guy smirked like he'd already taken my place. I wanted to be angry, to smash something, to call her and demand why. But anger wouldn't help. Not now. I needed to be sharp, to think 3 steps ahead, like I did at work when a project was falling apart. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a chess game, and she just made her opening move. My phone buzzed to life, and I scrolled through my contacts, stopping at a number I hadn't called in months. Not a friend, not family, just someone who owed me a favor, someone who knew how to handle situations like this. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the call button. Once I did this, there was no going back. No apologies, no reconciliation. Just me, drawing a line in the sand. I pressed call. The line rang twice before a voice picked up, calm and professional, like always. "It's me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I need you." There was a pause, then a quiet chuckle. "Took you long enough," they said. I didn't smile, but I felt something loosen in my chest, like I wasn't carrying this alone anymore. "Activate Protocol Ember," I said, the words feeling strange but right, like flipping a switch I'd always known was there. They didn't ask questions, just said, "Give me 12 hours." I hung up, my hands still shaking but not from fear anymore. Protocol Ember wasn't a plan, it was a promise, one I'd made to myself years ago when I first noticed her pulling away, when the late nights and locked phones started adding up. I didn't want to believe it then, but I'd prepared anyway. I stood up, pacing the small room, my mind racing but clear. She thought she'd cornered me, Thought the restraining order and the lies about our money would keep me down. That guy she was with probably thought he'd walked into a perfect setup. Her, the house, my life, all his for the taking. But they didn't know me. Not really. I stopped at the window, pulling back the curtain to look at the parking lot, empty except for a couple of beat-up cars and a stray cat slinking through the shadows. The neon sign flickered again, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. I wasn't the kid she called me. I was the guy who'd built our life from nothing, who'd stayed up late debugging code to pay for her vacations, who'd loved her even when she stopped loving me back. And I wasn't done yet. I grabbed my duffel bag, stuffing the papers inside, along with my suit and the second envelope. Checkout wasn't until noon, but I didn't want to stay here any longer than I had to. I needed to move, to start putting pieces in place before she realized I wasn't broken. The restraining order meant I couldn't go near her, but that didn't mean I couldn't fight. I slung the bag over my shoulder and stepped outside, the morning air cold against my face. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked to my car, the one she thought she'd take from me. I tossed the bag in the back and slid into the driver's seat, my hands steady on the wheel. She thought she'd won. She thought I was out of moves. But this game was just starting, and I was already planning my next one. The diner was half empty, the kind of place where truckers and night owls go to nurse coffee and forget their problems. I sat in a corner booth, my duffel bag tucked under the table, the second envelope still unopened in my jacket pocket. The waitress poured me a second cup without asking, her smile tired but kind, and I nodded my thanks, staring at the steam rising from the mug. My phone sat face up on the table, screen dark, but I wasn't waiting for calls from her or anyone else tied to last night's disaster. I was waiting for Kieran Blake, the only guy I trusted to help me turn this mess around. He wasn't a friend, not exactly, just someone I'd worked with years ago on a software contract, someone who knew the law and how to bend it without breaking. I'd called him after leaving the motel, and he'd said to meet here, no questions asked. The clock above the counter read 9:47 a.m., and I tapped my fingers on the table, my mind racing through the past 24 hours, the rooftop, the divorce papers, the restraining order. She thought she'd buried me, but I was already digging my way out. The bell above the door jingled, and Kieran walked in, his trench coat damp from the morning drizzle. He spotted me and slid into the booth, his eyes scanning the room like he was checking for trouble. "You look like hell," he said, not smiling, but there was no malice in it. I shrugged, pushing the coffee toward him. "Feel like it too," I said, keeping my voice low. He leaned back, studying me, and I could tell he was waiting for me to spill everything. So I did, not the whole story, just enough. The anniversary, her new guy, the eviction, the lies about our money. I left out the second envelope. That was mine, at least for now. Kieran listened, his face unreadable, and when I finished, he didn't offer sympathy or tell me I'd be okay. Instead, he pulled out a notepad and said, "Let's start with the house." My shoulders relaxed a little. This was why I'd called him. He didn't waste time on feelings. He went straight for the leverage. I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. "The house isn't in my name," I said, and his eyebrow twitched, just enough to show he was surprised. "Never was. It's held in a property trust, tied to a company I set up years ago. She doesn't know. I'd done it on a whim back when we first bought the place, a precaution I couldn't even explain at the time. Maybe I'd sensed something even then, some crack in the way she talked about our future." Kieran jotted something down, his pen moving fast. "Smart," he said. "That's your first move. She thinks she's got the deed, but you've got the strings." I nodded, feeling a spark of control for the first time since the rooftop. The trust was my ace, a quiet piece of paperwork that could unravel her whole plan. But I needed more than that. I needed to know how deep this went, how long she'd been playing me. That's when I thought of Marla, my cousin. She wasn't just family. She was a pit bull with a laptop, someone who'd walked away from real estate to chase cyber investigations. If anyone could dig into this new guy and the money trail, it was her. I pulled out my phone and texted her, "Need you. It's bad. Call me." I didn't wait for a reply. Marla didn't do small talk. She'd call when she was ready. Kieran watched me, his pen still moving. "You're building a team," he said, not asking, just stating it like he already saw the board I was playing on. I didn't answer, just sipped my coffee, letting the warmth ground me. A team. That's what this was becoming. Me, Kieran, Marla, maybe others. Not to beg her back, not to prove I was better than her new guy, but to take back what was mine, piece by piece. Kieran flipped his notepad shut and leaned in. "Here's how we start," he said. "The trust stays quiet. No moves yet. Let her think she's got the house. I'll file a motion to freeze any asset transfers she's trying to pull. That restraining order? We'll challenge it, show it's based on lies. But we need dirt, real dirt. I nodded, my mind already on Marla. She'd find something: texts, emails, bank records, anything to prove this wasn't just a breakup but a setup. I thought about the guy from last night, his smirk, the way he'd stood there like he'd already won. Who was he? Not just some fling, she'd called him the real man, like she'd been comparing us for months. My jaw tightened, but I pushed the anger down. I couldn't afford to feel right now. I needed to think. The waitress came by, refilling my cup, and I glanced out the window at the gray sky. The diner felt like a bubble, a place where the world couldn't touch me yet. But it wouldn't last. She was out there, probably laughing with him, signing papers she thought would seal my fate. I pictured the house, our house, where we'd painted walls together, where I'd fixed the leaky sink while she teased me about my toolbox. It wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was my life, my sweat, my promises. And she thought she could take it with a smile and a signature. I looked at Kieran, his eyes sharp and ready. What's next? I asked. He tapped his pen on the table. We get someone to trace the money. Every cent she's claiming, every account she's touched. I know a forensic accountant, Avery Lynn. She's discreet, and she's good. I nodded, committing the name to memory. Avery Lynn. Another piece on the board. My phone buzzed, and I glanced at it. Marla, texting back. On my way. You owe me coffee. I almost smiled, the first real one since last night. Marla didn't mess around, and knowing she was coming made me feel less like I was drowning. I looked at Kieran, who was watching me again, like he was measuring how much fight I had left. I'm not done, I said, more to myself than to him. He nodded, slipping his notepad into his coat. Good. Because she's not playing to wound, she's playing to win. But so are we. He stood, tossing a few bucks on the table for the coffee. Stay sharp. I'll call you tonight. He walked out, the bell jingling behind him, and I sat there, alone again but not empty. The second envelope felt heavier in my pocket, but I still didn't open it. I didn't need to. It was my reminder that I'd seen this coming, even if I hadn't wanted to admit it. The diner hummed around me, plates clinking, a radio playing softly, and I leaned back, my coffee cooling in my hands. She thought she'd written the end of my story, but this wasn't her game anymore. It was mine, and I was just getting started. The air in my car felt stale, like it was holding on to the weight of the last few days. I parked in a quiet lot behind an old strip mall, the kind of place nobody notices, and leaned back in the driver's seat, my phone resting on my thigh. Marla's text from earlier was still open. Got something on your guy. Meet me at the usual spot, 2 p.m. The usual spot meant a coffee shop across town, one we'd used back when we were kids plotting pranks, not unraveling betrayals. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 1:37 p.m., and let out a slow breath. My fingers brushed the second envelope in my jacket, still unopened, still waiting. I didn't need it yet, but knowing it was there kept me steady, like a map I'd drawn for myself long before I knew I'd need one. The diner meeting with Kieran had lit a fire in me, not the burning kind that makes you reckless, but the quiet kind that keeps you sharp. She thought she'd left me with nothing. Her new guy thought he'd stepped into my life like it was his for the taking. But I was about to find out who he really was, and that was the first step to taking it all back. I drove across town, the radio off, my thoughts loud enough to fill the silence. The coffee shop was tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner, its windows fogged from the afternoon chill. I parked and walked in, the bell above the door giving a soft chime. Marla was already there, tucked in a booth at the back, her laptop open and a half-empty latte beside her. She looked up, her eyes narrowing like she was sizing me up, but she didn't say anything about how early. Instead, she slid a folder across the table and leaned back, crossing her arms. You're not gonna like this, she said, her voice low but firm. I sat down, my pulse picking up, and opened the folder. Pages of printouts stared back at me, bank records, emails, even a grainy photo of the guy from the rooftop. Damien. I'd heard his name once, but it was enough to make my skin crawl every time I thought of it. I looked at Marla, waiting for her to explain, because the numbers and dates in front of me weren't making sense yet. She leaned forward, tapping the photo. This clown's not who he says he is, she said. Calls himself a venture capitalist, but he's no high roller. Disgraced hedge fund manager, got run out of Arizona 3 years ago for fraud. Sealed charges, but I know people who know people. She smirked, just for a second, and I felt a flicker of gratitude for her, for the way she dove into this like it was personal. I scanned the pages, my eyes catching on words like misappropriation and unpaid fines. This wasn't just a guy who'd stolen my wife. He was a con artist, someone who'd built his whole life on lies. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with something colder, something that made me want to keep reading, to understand every move he'd made. Marla kept talking, her voice steady, like she was briefing me for a mission. He's been cozy with her for at least 8 months. Met through some crypto startup she was consulting for. Sound familiar? I nodded, my jaw tight. Consulting. That's what she'd called those late nights, those weekends away. I'd believed her because I wanted to, because I thought love meant trust. I flipped to the bank records, and that's when it hit me like a brick. Transfers, big ones, from our joint account to some offshore setup I'd never heard of. My money. Money I'd earned debugging code at 3 a.m., money I'd saved for our future, funneled into a crypto scheme that was already tanking. I looked at Marla, my voice low. How much? She didn't blink. Over 200 grand so far. And it's not just you. They've got other investors, small-timers who don't know they're being bled dry. I leaned back, the folder heavy in my hands. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was bigger, uglier. I pictured her laughing with him, spending my money on their new life, while I was packing a duffel bag in a motel. But I didn't let myself spiral. I couldn't. Not when I was this close to understanding the game they were playing. Marla sipped her latte, watching me like she was waiting for me to crack. But I didn't. I closed the folder and slid it back to her. What else? I asked. She raised an eyebrow, impressed maybe, and pulled up something on her laptop. Emails, she said. Nothing direct, but enough to show they're not just lovers, they're partners. She's been signing off on transfers, using her name to make it look legit. I nodded, my mind racing but clear. Partners. That word stung worse than anything else, worse than the rooftop, worse than the divorce papers. She hadn't just left me, she'd chosen him, built a plan with him, turned our life into their scam. I thought of the house, the trust Kieran was helping me protect, and I felt a small spark of relief. They didn't know about that. They didn't know I was already moving pieces of my own. I looked out the window, the street quiet except for a kid on a bike weaving through parked cars. Part of me wanted to go public, to send these records to every friend who'd stood silent at the party, to show them who she really was. But that was too easy, too fast. I wanted her to feel what I felt, cornered, exposed, powerless. Not yet, though. I needed her to think she was still winning, to keep smiling with him while I tightened the net. Marla shut her laptop, her eyes on me. What's your play? She asked. I didn't answer right away, just let the question sit. Let it settle into something solid. We watch, I said finally. Let them dig their own hole. When it's deep enough, we push. She nodded, like she'd expected that, and I knew she'd stick with me, no matter how long it took. The coffee shop hummed around us, baristas calling orders, an old guy reading a newspaper, but I felt separate from it, like I was in my own world now, one where every move mattered. I thought about Kieran's accountant, the one he'd mentioned, and how she could trace every cent they'd stolen. I thought about the trust, the house, the life they thought they'd taken. They were so sure of themselves, so sure I'd crumble. But I was still here, still thinking, still fighting. I stood, tossing a few bucks on the table for the coffee I hadn't touched. Marla grabbed her bag, ready to follow, but I shook my head. I need to walk, I said. She didn't argue, just gave me a look that said she'd be there when I was ready. I stepped outside, the air cool and sharp, and started down the street, my hands in my pockets, the folder's weight still in my mind. They thought they knew the board, but I was rewriting the rules, and they wouldn't see me coming until it was too late. The cabin smelled of pine and old wood, a quiet refuge tucked so deep in the woods you'd miss it if you didn't know the way. I stood on the porch, my breath fogging in the early morning chill, a mug of coffee warming my hands. My uncle's place, left to me after he passed, was nothing fancy, just a single story with a slanted roof and windows that creaked when you opened them. But it was off-grid, no paper trail, no way for anyone to know I was here. After the coffee shop with Marla, I'd driven straight out, needing space to think, to let the truth about Damien and her sink in. My phone was off, tucked in a drawer inside, because I didn't want distractions, not from Kieran, not from Marla, not from the world that still thought I was the guy who'd lost everything on a rooftop. Out here, it was just me and the trees, and for the first time in days, I could hear my own thoughts. The folder Marla gave me was on the kitchen table, its pages spread out like a puzzle I was halfway through solving. 200 grand gone, funneled into a crypto scam, and she'd signed off on every step. But I wasn't ready to move yet. I needed more, something to make sure they couldn't wiggle free when the hammer fell. I leaned against the porch railing, the forest stretching out in every direction, silent except for a bird calling somewhere far off. The cabin felt like a reset, a place where I could strip away the noise and figure out who I was now, not the husband she'd humiliated, not the kid she'd mocked, but someone else, someone she'd never seen coming. I thought about Celine, an old friend from college who'd always had my back, even when I didn't deserve it. She worked for some federal financial crimes outfit now, a compliance officer with a knack for spotting lies. We hadn't talked in years, not since she'd warned me about her, back when we were engaged. She's got sharp edges, Celine had said, her voice soft but serious. I'd laughed it off, too in love to listen. But I wasn't laughing now. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding me, and decided it was time to call her. Not for pity, not for a shoulder to lean on, but because she'd know what to do with the kind of dirt Marla had dug up. I went inside, the floorboards creaking under my boots, and pulled my phone from the drawer. The battery was low, but it'd last long enough. I found Celine's number, my thumb hesitating over the call button. What if she didn't want to hear from me? What if she'd moved on, written me off as the guy who chose the wrong woman? I pushed the thought away and hit call, my pulse steady but loud in my ears. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Well, damn, she said, her voice warm, like no time had passed. Didn't expect to see your name pop up. I smiled despite myself, leaning against the counter. Yeah, I'm full of surprises, I said, keeping it light. I didn't dive into the whole story, not yet, just told her I was in a bind, something financial, something dirty. Can we meet? I asked. She didn't hesitate. Tomorrow, noon. My office. Bring everything you've got. I thanked her, hung up, and felt a weight lift, not all the way but enough to keep me moving. Back on the porch, I sat in an old rocking chair, the folder in my lap. I didn't open it again. I knew what was inside. Bank transfers, emails, that photo of him smirking like he owned the world. Instead, I thought about her, about the way she'd changed over the years, little shifts I'd ignored. The way she'd stopped asking about my day, the way she'd roll her eyes when I talked about my projects. I'd thought it was stress, maybe boredom, but now I saw it for what it was: contempt. She'd been planning this, maybe not from the start, but long enough to make a fool of me. I set the mug down, my hand steady, and let myself feel it, not the hurt, but the clarity. She wasn't the woman I'd married. Maybe she never was. And that guy? He wasn't some mastermind, just a small-time crook who'd found a partner as greedy as he was. The sun climbed higher, cutting through the trees, and I started thinking about next steps. Celine was a start, but I needed more than a report to some agency. I needed to know how much they'd taken, not just from me but from anyone else they'd conned. Marla had mentioned other investors, people who didn't even know they were being played. I grabbed a notepad from inside and started writing names, dates, accounts, anything I could remember from the folder. My hand moved fast, the pen scratching against the paper, and for a moment, I felt like I was back at work, debugging a program, finding the glitch that'd make it all fall apart. That's what this was, a glitch in their plan, and I was the one who'd find it. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the page was full, and then I stopped, my breath even, my mind sharp. Inside, I heated up some leftovers from a gas station sandwich I'd grabbed on the drive out. The cabin had no Wi-Fi, no TV, just a radio that picked up static more than songs, but I didn't mind. The quiet was what I needed, a chance to see the board clearly. I thought about Kieran, how he'd said to let her think she'd won, and Marla, how she'd already pulled more than I'd expected. And now Celine, ready to step in without asking for explanations. I wasn't alone, not the way she'd wanted me to be. I finished eating, washed the plate in the sink, and stepped back outside, the air cooler now, the shadows longer. My phone buzzed, a text from Marla. Avery's in. She's digging deeper. Call me tomorrow. Avery, Kieran's accountant. Another piece falling into place. I didn't text back, not yet. I wanted to hold on to this moment, this feeling of being one step ahead, even if they didn't know it. I walked to the edge of the clearing, the trees thick and dark, and looked up at the sky, clear except for a few wisps of cloud. The cabin was mine, free and clear, something she'd never touched, never even knew about. It wasn't much, but it was enough, a place to stand while I rebuilt. I thought about the house, the one she thought she'd stolen, and the trust that kept it out of her hands. I thought about the rooftop, her arm around him, the way she looked at me like I was nothing. My fingers curled into fists, but I didn't let the anger take over. Instead, I let it fuel me, let it sharpen the edges of my plan. Celine would help me file something official, something that'd start the wheels turning. Marla and Avery would keep digging, finding every lie, every dollar. And me? I'd wait, watch, and when the time was right, I'd pull the thread that'd unravel it all. I turned back to the cabin, the folder waiting inside, and felt something settle in me, not peace, not yet, but purpose. They thought they'd broken me, but I was just getting started, and they'd never see me coming. The cabin's quiet was starting to feel like home, but I couldn't stay hidden forever. I stood in the small kitchen, my coffee gone cold, staring at a letter I drafted on a legal pad. Not to her, not to that guy, but to a law firm nobody would connect to me, not yet. It was tied to the property trust, the one that held the house she thought she'd stolen. My fingers tapped the counter, steady but restless, as I pictured her in our old living room, probably sipping wine with him, laughing about how they'd outsmarted me. The thought didn't burn like it used to. It just made me focus, made me want to move faster. Kieran had called last night, his voice calm but urgent, saying it was time to start pulling strings. Let her feel the ground shift, he'd said. Not enough to panic, just enough to wonder. That's what this letter was, a nudge, a crack in her perfect plan. I folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, and tucked it into my jacket next to the other one, the one I still hadn't opened. I didn't need to. It was my anchor, a reminder I'd been ready for this longer than I wanted to admit. I drove into town, the forest giving way to open fields, then the first signs of strip malls and gas stations. The post office was a small brick building, tucked between a barber shop and a thrift store, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking. I parked and walked inside, the envelope in my hand, my pulse even but quick. The clerk didn't look up as I paid for certified mail, didn't ask questions as I scribbled the law firm's address. It wasn't much, just a formal notice, a courtesy letter from the trust, reminding the current occupant of certain legal obligations. Nothing to scare her, not yet, but enough to make her pause, to make her check the fine print she thought she'd already won. I handed it over, watched the clerk stamp it, and walked out, the morning air sharp against my face. It was done. The first move was in play, and she wouldn't even know it was me, not until it was too late. Back in the car, I didn't head to the cabin. I needed to keep moving, to feel like I was building something, not just hiding. I drove to a diner on the edge of town, not the one I'd met Kieran at, but close enough to feel familiar. The waitress smiled as I slid into a booth, and I ordered coffee, black, no sugar, letting the routine ground me. My phone buzzed, Marla, texting a single line. Avery's got something big. Call me. I set the phone down, my mind already racing. Avery, the accountant Kieran had brought in, was digging into the money trail, and if Marla was excited, it meant they'd found more than just loose change. I wanted to call right then, but I made myself wait, made myself sip the coffee and think it through. Every piece mattered. Every bank transfer, every lie, every step they'd taken to bury me. I wasn't just fighting for the house or the money. I was fighting for the truth, for the life I'd built before she decided it was hers to take. The diner was quiet, just a couple of old guys at the counter talking about the weather, their voices low and steady. I leaned back, my eyes on the window, watching cars roll by. I thought about the house, not as it was now, but as it had been. Us painting the walls that first summer, her laughing when I got more paint on myself than the trim. I'd thought those moments meant something, thought they were promises we'd both keep. But she'd been planning something else, something colder, and I'd been too blind to see it. My hand went to my jacket, brushing against the envelopes, and I felt that quiet fire again, the one that kept me sharp. She wanted the house. Fine. Let her try to hold on to it when the lights went out, when the water stopped running, when the trust started pulling back every service she thought was hers. Kieran had said to make it subtle, to let her unravel herself, and that's what I was doing, one letter at a time. I pictured her opening the mail, maybe a few days from now, her brow furrowing as she read the trust letter. She'd ignore it at first. She was too proud to think she'd missed something. But it'd nag at her, make her double-check the paperwork she thought was airtight. I almost smiled, imagining her calling him, her voice sharp, asking what it meant. He'd probably shrug it off, tell her not to worry, but he'd be wrong. They both would. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness matching my mood, and let myself plan the next step. Kieran was working on the restraining order, filing motions to show it was built on lies. Marla and Avery were chasing the money, and Celine was waiting for me tomorrow, ready to turn their scam into a federal problem. I wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. Not just because they were helping, but because they believed I could do this, that I wasn't the kid she'd called me. The waitress refilled my cup, and I nodded my thanks, my eyes drifting to the folder I'd brought from the cabin. Not Marla's folder, just my own notes, dates, memories, anything I could think of that might help. I didn't open it now. I didn't need to. Writing it all down had cleared my head, made me see the pattern in her lies. The late nights, the locked phone, the way she'd stopped looking at me like I mattered. It wasn't just him. It was her, choosing to build something new on top of my ruins. I set the mug down, my hands steady, and checked my watch. Time to move again. I left cash on the table and stepped outside. The air cooler now, the sky gray but not heavy. My phone buzzed again. Marla, probably wondering why I hadn't called. I'd get to it, but not yet. I needed this moment, this feeling of control, however small. I got in the car and started driving. No destination, just the open road and the hum of the engine. The letter was out there now, a seed planted in her perfect world. Soon, she'd get another one. Maybe a notice about the utilities, maybe something sharper from the trust. Kieran had said to keep it quiet, to let her think she was still in charge, and I trusted him. But it wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about showing her she'd misjudged me, that I wasn't the guy who'd walk away with nothing. I thought about the cabin, waiting for me, and the team I was building, piece by piece. Marla's fire, Kieran's calm, Celine's steel, Avery's precision. They were my edges now, my way forward. I turned onto a back road, the trees closing in, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not even revenge, just a quiet certainty. She thought she'd written my ending, thought she'd left me in the dust. But I was still here, still moving, and when the time came, I'd be the one standing while her world fell apart. The gala was louder than I expected, a glittering mess of chandeliers and clinking glasses, the kind of event I'd always avoided but knew she'd love. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, my new suit fitting like it was made for me, sharper than anything I'd worn in years. My heart wasn't racing, not anymore. I'd spent weeks planning this moment, not out of anger, but out of necessity, a need to show her and everyone else that I wasn't the broken man she'd left on that rooftop. The folder in my hand wasn't Marla's old one, but a new one, thicker, heavier, filled with everything we'd uncovered, bank records, asset transfers, security footage that laid their scam bare. I'd driven into the city this morning, the cabin's quiet fading behind me, replaced by the hum of purpose. Kieran had prepped me last night, his voice steady over the phone. Don't gloat, don't linger, just drop the truth and walk away. That's what I was here to do. Not to beg or fight, but to unveil, to let the world see what she'd done. The crowd was a mix of her friends, his contacts, and a few faces I recognized from our old life. People who'd stood silent when she humiliated me. I spotted her across the room, her dress catching the light, her laugh louder than it needed to be. He was next to her, his arm around her waist, that same smirk from the rooftop plastered on his. My stomach twisted, but I didn't let it take over. I'd seen that smirk in Marla's photos, read about his lies in Avery's reports, heard about his sealed charges from Celine's contacts. He wasn't a kingpin, just a fraud who'd found someone as greedy as he was. I adjusted my tie, my fingers brushing the folder, and started moving through the crowd, my steps deliberate, my eyes fixed on them. Nobody noticed me at first, not her, not him, not the friends who'd once called me family. I was a ghost in my own story, but that was about to change. I reached their circle, close enough to smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn for years. She didn't see me until I was right there, my shadow falling across her glass. Her laugh stopped, her eyes widening, and for a second, I saw something flicker in them, a shock, maybe fear, but not regret. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp, trying to sound in control. He turned, his smirk faltering, and I felt a quiet satisfaction at the way his hand tightened on her waist, like he was bracing for a hit. I didn't answer her, didn't give her the fight she wanted. Instead, I held up the folder, letting it catch the light, and spoke to the crowd, my voice calm but loud enough to carry. "I thought you all should know the truth," I said, my eyes moving from her to him, then to the faces around us. "About the house, the money, and what they've been doing behind your backs." The room didn't go silent, not like in movies, but it shifted, heads turning, murmurs pausing. I opened the folder and started pulling out pages, handing them to the nearest person, a guy I vaguely remembered from one of her work parties. "These are bank records," I said, keeping my tone even. "Transfers from our joint account to a crypto scheme that's already collapsing. My money, your money, anyone who trusted them." I handed out another page, this one with timestamps and account numbers, all traced by Avery's careful work. And this? Security footage from our house, showing them moving assets, signing papers they thought nobody would see. I didn't look at her now. I didn't need to. I could feel her staring, her breath catching, and it was enough. I handed out the last page, a summary Celine had helped me draft, clean and legal, tying their names to fraud and theft. "Read it," I said to the crowd. "Then decide who you're standing next to." She tried to speak, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "This is ridiculous," she said, forcing a laugh, but it sounded brittle, like glass about to crack. "He's lying, trying to make me look bad." I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I just set the folder on the nearest table, open for anyone to take, and pulled one last thing from my pocket, a single envelope, not the one I'd carried since the rooftop, but a new one, sealed and simple. I placed it beside the folder, my eyes meeting hers for the first time. "Cease and desist," I said, loud enough for her to hear but not the crowd. "You're not allowed within 500 feet of me or my property. Not anymore." Her face went pale, her mouth opening but no words coming out. He stepped forward, his chest puffed like he was ready to play hero. But before he could say anything, a man in a dark suit appeared at his side, a marshal, his badge glinting under the chandeliers. "Damien Cross?" the marshal said, his voice flat. "You're served." The room tilted, gasps rippling through the crowd. I didn't stay to watch it unfold. I'd done what I came to do, laid out the truth, let it spread like fire. She called after me, her voice sharp but unsteady, but I didn't turn back. I walked through the crowd, their whispers following me, some shocked, some angry, none of them matching. My shoes clicked on the polished floor, the folder left behind for anyone curious enough to dig. The morning after the gala, I woke up in the cabin, the air heavy with the smell of rain-soaked wood. I lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling beams, my body tired but my mind sharp, replaying last night, the folder, her pale face, the marshal's badge glinting as he served that guy. I didn't feel victorious, not the way I thought I would. It was more like relief, like I'd finally set down a weight I'd been carrying since the rooftop. My phone was on the nightstand, already buzzing with notifications, text from Marla, a missed call from Kieran, even a news alert with his name in the headline. I didn't check them yet. I needed a minute, just one, to sit with what I'd done, to let it settle before the world pulled me back in. I got up, pulled on a sweater, and made coffee, the old pot hissing like it was annoyed to be awake. The cabin was quiet, no hum of city life, just the patter of rain outside, and it felt right, like this was where I was supposed to be, at least for now. I sat at the kitchen table, mug in hand, and finally opened my phone. Marla's text was first, "You're trending, genius. Call me." I almost smiled, picturing her glued to her laptop, tracking every whisper online. Kieran's voicemail was shorter, just, "Good work. Stay low for now." The news alert was what caught my eye, a local outlet reporting fraud charges against a disgraced hedge fund manager, his name front and center, tied to a collapsing crypto scheme. No mention of her, not yet, but I knew that was coming. I set the phone down, my coffee cooling, and let the reality sink in. The folder I'd left at the gala wasn't just a bomb, it was a spark, and now the fire was spreading, catching everyone who looked the other way when she humiliated me. I didn't want to gloat, didn't want to dance on their graves, but I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction of knowing they weren't untouchable anymore. The rain picked up, drumming against the roof, and I thought about the people who'd stood silent that night on the rooftop, her friends, our friends, the ones who'd let her call me a kid without blinking. Some of them had been at the gala, clutching my folder, their faces tight with shock. Now they were calling, texting, leaving voicemails I hadn't listened to yet. Her sister was one of them, her number popping up twice this morning. I remembered her at our wedding, toasting us with tears in her eyes, saying we were perfect together. She'd stopped calling me months ago, probably fed the same lies as everyone else. I didn't call her back. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't owe her, or any of them, my forgiveness. They'd chosen their side, and I wasn't here to make them feel better about switching now. I stood and walked to the window, the forest blurred by rain. My mind kept drifting to the bigger picture, the one Marla had hinted at, other investors, people like me who'd been bled dry by their scam. That's what stuck with me, more than her betrayal, more than his smirk. I'd lost money, sure, but I'd had enough to start over. Others didn't. I pulled out my laptop, the one I'd barely touched since moving to the cabin, and opened a blank document. My fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant but sure. I started typing, not a plan, not a letter, but an idea. A foundation, something to help people blindsided by lies like hers. People who didn't have a Kieran or a Marla to pull them out. I wrote about legal literacy, about teaching folks how to spot scams in their own homes, their own marriages. It wasn't revenge. It was bigger than that. A way to turn my mess into something solid, something that'd outlast her. The words came fast, my coffee forgotten, the rain a steady rhythm behind me. I didn't know much about nonprofits, but I knew enough to start. Celine would help, maybe even take a lead role, and Marla would dig into anything we needed. I thought about the money I'd recovered, the accounts Kieran had frozen before they could drain them completely. It wasn't all of it, but it was enough to seed something, to give people a lifeline I hadn't had. I stopped typing, my hands still, and looked at what I'd written. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, a piece of me she couldn't touch. I saved the file and leaned back, the chair creaking under me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was building again, not just tearing down. My phone buzzed again, pulling me back. Another news alert, this one mentioning her name, not the headline, but buried in the details, a person of interest in the fraud case. I didn't read the whole thing, didn't need to. The net was tightening, just like Celine had promised when we met at her office. She'd taken my folder, my notes, and turned them into a report that had landed on the right desks. I pictured her now, probably at her desk, sipping tea, her calm voice laying out the next steps. I owed her more than I could say, but I'd start with this foundation, something she could shape into more than just my idea. I stood, stretching my arms, and walked to the door, opening it to let the damp air in. The rain was lighter now, the forest sharp and green, and I stepped onto the porch, my boots heavy on the wood. I thought about him, locked up somewhere, his crypto empire imploding. I thought about her, alone now, her friends ghosting her, her family scrambling to save face. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for them, to think they'd suffered enough. But I didn't. They'd built this, not me. I'd just shown the world what they'd done. My phone buzzed again, Marla, probably with another update, but I let it sit. I needed this moment, this quiet before the next step. The foundation wasn't just a plan, it was a promise, to myself and anyone else who'd been burned. I'd give what I could, not out of spite, but because I knew what it was like to lose everything and still have to stand. I leaned against the railing, the rain misting my face, and felt something settle inside me, not joy, not peace, but a kind of strength I hadn't known I had. She thought she'd broken me, thought I'd fade away. But I was still here, still moving, and now I was building something she'd never understand. The rain stopped, the clouds parting, and I turned back inside, ready for whatever came next, knowing I'd face it on my terms, not hers. The house felt smaller than I remembered, its walls bare and echoing as I walked through the front door. The movers were already finishing up, their boots scuffing the hardwood I'd refinished years ago, back when I thought this place would be ours forever. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust in the air, and for a moment, I stood still, letting the emptiness sink in. The trust had taken it back, clean, legal, final, and now it was just a shell, stripped of her perfume, her laughter, all the things I'd once loved. I'd driven into town this morning, the cabin's quiet behind me, knowing I had to see it one last time before letting it go. Not because I wanted it back, but because I needed to close this door myself, on my terms. My boots clicked on the floor, steady and slow. As I moved from room to room, memories flickering like old film, us cooking dinner in the kitchen, arguing over paint colors in the hallway, her smiling at me from the couch. I didn't linger on them. They weren't mine anymore. Not really. I was here to end it, not to mourn. The movers called out, asking if I needed anything else, and I shook my head, waving them off. They'd packed what little I'd wanted, a few books, some tools, things she'd never cared about. The rest was gone, sold or donated, the trust handling it all with the kind of precision Kieran had promised. I stopped in the living room, the fireplace cold and dark, and thought about the gala, the folder, the way her world had started crumbling. Marla had texted me yesterday, saying the state was freezing her assets now, digging into the lies she'd spun about our money. It wasn't my fight anymore. Celine's report had done its job, and the courts were taking over. I didn't need to see her lose to know I'd won. Winning wasn't about her suffering. It was about me standing here, whole, ready to walk away. I ran my hand along the mantle, the wood smooth under my fingers, and felt a weight lift, not all at once but enough to notice. Outside, the garden was overgrown, weeds choking the roses we'd planted that first spring. I stepped onto the patio, the air warm with late summer, and remembered her posing for photos here, her smile bright for the camera, our anniversary parties filled with friends who'd later turn their backs. I didn't hate her, not anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I'd spend enough on her. Instead, I knelt by a patch of bare soil, pulling a small tree from a pot I'd brought from the car. It was a maple, young but sturdy, something I'd picked up on a whim, thinking it'd outlast this moment, this house, maybe even me. I dug with a trowel, the earth soft and yielding, and set the tree's roots in place, packing the dirt tight. It wasn't much, but it felt right, a mark of something new, something that didn't belong to her or him or the past. I hammered a small plaque into the ground beside it, the words simple, to new beginnings. No names, no dates, just a promise I was making to myself. I stood, brushing dirt from my hands, and looked at the house one last time. The movers were gone now, their truck rumbling down the street, leaving me alone with the quiet. I didn't need to go back inside. Every room had said its piece, every corner had given up its ghosts. I thought about the cabin, waiting for me, and the nonprofit I'd started sketching out with Celine's help. It wasn't just an idea anymore. Marla had found a lawyer to file the paperwork, and Kieran was lining up donors, people who'd read about the fraud case and wanted to help. I didn't want their pity, didn't want to be the guy who'd been through hell. I wanted to be the guy who built something better, who took the worst thing that had happened and turned it into a lifeline for someone else. The tree swayed slightly in the breeze, its leaves catching the sun, and I nodded to myself, like it was agreeing with me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, expecting Marla or Celine. It was Marla, her text short, "She's done. Assets locked, no way out. You good?" I read it twice, letting the words settle. Done. Not just the house, not just the money, but her whole plan, the one she'd built with him to bury me. I texted back, "Yeah, I'm good." And I meant it. Not because she'd lost, but because I hadn't. I'd walked away from the gala, from the lies, from the life I thought I'd needed, and I was still here, still moving. I slipped the phone back in my pocket, my fingers brushing the second envelope, the one I hadn't opened since the rooftop. I didn't need it now. Whatever was inside was just insurance, a backup for a fight I'd already won. I left it there, unopened, a reminder I'd been smarter than I gave myself credit for. I walked to my car, parked at the curb where I used to park after late nights at work, back when I'd come home to her waiting, or so I thought. The street was quiet, the neighbors curtains still, like they knew this wasn't their story anymore. I got in, the engine starting with a low hum, and took one last look at the house. It wasn't mine, not in the way it used to be, but it wasn't hers either. The trust would sell it, and someone new would move in, paint the walls, plant their own garden. I didn't care who, they'd get a fresh start, something I was claiming for myself too. I pulled away, the tree's shadow fading in my rear view, and drove toward town, my mind already on the next step. Celine wanted to meet tomorrow, talk about the nonprofit's first project, and Marla was pushing me to hire someone to handle the legal side. They were my team now, not just allies, but people who saw me for who I was, not who she tried to make me. The road stretched out, the city giving way to open fields, and I rolled down the window, letting the warm air rush in. I thought about her, not with anger but with distance, like she was a stranger I'd once known. She tried to break me, thought she could rewrite my life to fit her story. But I'd rewritten it myself, not with revenge but with something stronger: choice. I chose to plant that tree, to let the house go, to build something new. The cabin was waiting, and so was the work ahead, the kind that'd matter long after her name faded from the headlines. I turned up the radio, a song I didn't know filling the car, and let myself smile, not big but real. She thought I was nothing, but I was everything she'd never understand, and I was just getting started. The ocean stretched out in front of my new place, its waves rolling steady and quiet under the evening sky. I leaned back in a chair on the porch, the wood creaking under me, a glass of water sweating in my hand. The house wasn't big, just a single story with wide windows and a roof that could handle the coastal storms, but I designed it myself, every beam and corner planned during late nights at the cabin when I needed something to believe in. A year had passed since the rooftop, since her voice cut through me, calling me a kid in front of everyone I trusted. That night felt distant now, like a story I'd heard about someone else. I wasn't that guy anymore, not the one who'd walked away with divorce papers and a second envelope he was too scared to open. I was here, on this porch, with a life I'd built from the ground up, and it was enough, more than enough. The sunset painted the water gold, and I let myself sit with it, let myself feel the weight of everything I'd done to get here. The nonprofit had taken off faster than I'd expected. Celine was running it now, her office a few miles down the coast, where she turned my rough ideas into something real: workshops, legal clinics, even a hotline for people caught in financial scams like the one I'd survived. I'd stopped by yesterday, watched her train a new group of volunteers, her voice calm but fierce, the way it had been when she'd helped me file that first report. Marla was still in the mix, digging into cases for us, her laptop always humming with leads she'd chase without being asked. I didn't run the day-to-day anymore. I'd handed that to Celine, trusting her to carry it further than I could. My part was quieter now, mentoring kids like Michael, a teenager who'd shown up at one of our programs, his eyes wide but guarded, like mine had been once. He reminded me of who I'd been: trusting, eager, too quick to love, and I wanted him to know he could be more than his mistakes, just like I learned to be. I sipped my water, the glass cool against my lips, and thought about the house I'd left behind, the one with the maple tree I'd planted in the garden. It had sold months ago, to a young couple who'd probably never heard my name, never knew the fights and lies that had echoed in those walls. I didn't drive by, didn't check on the tree, I didn't need to. It was growing, same as me, and that was enough. The trust had cleared everything, Kieran making sure every cent went where it belonged, some to the nonprofit, some to my new place, the rest to people who'd been burned by the same scam. I didn't keep much, just enough to live simply, to wake up without worrying about bills or betrayals. The second envelope, the one I'd carried like a secret, was still unopened, tucked in a drawer inside. I'd thought about burning it once, letting it go with the rest of the past, but I kept it, not for her, not for him, but for me, a reminder I'd been ready, even when I didn't know it. My phone buzzed on the table, Marla's name lighting up the screen. I answered, her voice crackling through. "You see the latest?" she asked, not waiting for a hello. I hadn't, and I told her so, leaning back in my chair. "She's working retail now," she said, a laugh in her voice, not cruel but sharp. "Some department store downtown. Can you believe it?" I could, and I didn't. I pictured her behind a counter, folding clothes, her smile tight for customers, and felt nothing, not pity, not satisfaction, just a blank space where she used to be. "In him?" I asked, more out of habit than care. "Still waiting on trial," she said. "Won't see daylight for a while." I nodded to myself, the ocean steady in front of me, and thanked her for the update. She didn't ask if I was okay, she knew better, and I hung up, setting the phone down, my hands resting on my knees. They were ghosts now, both of them, fading into a life that wasn't mine anymore. I stood, stretching my arms, and walked to the edge of the porch, the salt air cool against my face. Michael was coming by tomorrow, something about a coding project he wanted help with, and I'd promised to show him the basics, same as I learned years ago when I was his age, dreaming of a life I thought I'd share with her. He'd asked me once, over burgers at the diner, why I wasn't angry, why I didn't hate them for what they'd done. I told him the truth: anger's a fire that burns you first, and I'd had enough scars. He didn't get it, not fully, but he nodded, like he trusted me to mean it. I looked out at the water, the horizon blurring into the sky, and thought about that kid on the rooftop, the one who'd believed in love so hard he forgot to believe in himself. I didn't miss him, but I didn't hate him either. He'd gotten me here, one painful step at a time. The nonprofit's logo was on a sign by the road, small but clear, a design Celine had picked because it looked like a sunrise. I liked that, the idea of starting over, not just for me, but for anyone who walked through our doors. We'd helped dozens already: single moms, retirees, even a guy my age who'd lost his savings to a scam not much different from hers. Every story was a thread, tying me to something bigger than my own hurt, something she'd never understand because she'd never cared about anything but herself. I didn't need her to see me now, didn't need her to know I'd won. Winning wasn't about her, it was about this porch, this view, the kid I'd mentor tomorrow, the people I'd help next week. I turned back to the house, the lights warm against the dusk, and felt a quiet strength settle in, not loud or showy but deep, like the ocean itself. I went inside, the door clicking shut behind me, and grabbed a notebook from the counter, jotting down ideas for Michael's project. The nonprofit was growing, and so was I, not into someone new, but into someone I'd always been, hidden under her lies and my own doubts. I thought about the gala, the folder, the tree, all the moments that had brought me here, and realized they weren't just pain, they were choices, mine, made when I could have given up but didn't. The sunset was gone now, the sky dark, And I stepped back outside, the stars starting to show. She thought she'd broken me, thought she'd written my story to end with her victory. But I'd taken the pen, and this house, this life, this quiet was my ending, not hers. I sat back in the chair, the waves whispering below, and knew the truth. They'd underestimated me, but I hadn't underestimated myself, and that was all I'd ever needed to keep going.